Well, hi, everybody. Hey, so I hold in my hand the most remarkable book ever written. Is it the Bible? Doesn't look big enough, does it? Well, in 1996, something happened to a Frenchman that made this, in my estimation, the most remarkable book ever written. Now, you'd never imagine it's even possible to have written this book if it wasn't right here in front of you. And what's more, when I get through telling you about it, I think you're going to agree with me, and together we're going to learn more about admiration and how you can have fresh impact on your corner of the world. Hi, I'm Doug Newton, pastor for 45 years, a national award-winning magazine editor, and author of 24 books. And this is At the Intersection with Doug Newton, where scripture, culture, and character meet. And I'm here to help you pursue the kind of character needed to align with scripture faithfully and to engage culture graciously. Now, each week I make one observation about our culture. I give one insight from the Bible that speaks to that issue, and I suggest one way to strengthen the character that you and I need to relate to our mixed up world with exemplary grace and fresh impact. I say it every week. This is a no gripe zone. Our question is not what's wrong with our culture. It's about what's the right way to respond. All right, let me get pulled back together again and get on with the big reveal for this book. What is this book? Well, now, in 1996, as I said, a man named Jean-Dominique Bauby, former editor-in-chief of French Elle magazine, he wrote, are you ready for this? He wrote The Diving Bell and the Butterfly. The Diving Bell and the Butterfly. Now, perhaps some of you are just a little worried that I'm calling this book the most remarkable book ever written. Doug, what about the Bible? Relax. The Bible is the most remarkable book in history, but I intentionally emphasize the word written, the most remarkable book ever written, because it's the mechanics of how this book got written that makes it the most remarkable. You'll see what I mean if I just open the book jacket and read for you. Now listen to this. In 1995, Jean-Dominique Bauby was the editor-in-chief of French Elle magazine. A 43-year-old man, father of 2 young children, known and loved for his wit and his style and his impassioned approach to life. By the end of the year, he was also the victim of a rare kind of stroke to the brainstem. After 20 days in a coma, Bauby awoke into a body that had all but stopped working. Only his left eye functioned, allowing him to see, and by blinking, allowing him to make it clear that his mind was unimpaired. Almost miraculously, he was soon able to express himself in the richest detail, blinking to select letters one by one as a special alphabet was slowly recited to him over and over again. In the same way, he was eventually able to compose this extraordinary book. My goodness. Look at what he wound up doing. Do you understand what I just read? Imagine yourself waking up one day locked in a body. In fact, it's called locked-in syndrome, that could no longer move except discovering that your left eye could blink. Imagine the horror. You couldn't even scream or cry out in fear, for someone to comfort you. I remember the first time I ever had an episode with vertigo. I didn't know what it was. Margie and I were in Budapest, Hungary. We had just gotten through speaking to a group of missionaries who went on to a retreat location somewhere in the country, and we were there by ourselves in Budapest to fly out the next day. I woke up in the morning, got out of bed, and fell to the floor. The whole room was spinning. I didn't know what had happened to me. I couldn't stand up. I became nauseated and sick, and this lasted for hours. I had never heard of vertigo before. I was scared of what was going on. But Bobby's situation would have been way worse. I mean, then not only waking up that way, imagine him trying to help people to know that he could still think normally. He was inside that body and blinking with his left eye to try to get them to understand that he was trying to communicate. And then they work out this alphabet system to communicate. And then imagine yourself communicating that way. I mean, in fact, imagine right now just trying to compose one small email paragraph by having someone start reciting A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, and as they do, they're watching for your left eye to blink to know what letter to write down. You blink on the letter R, they write it down, and now the next letter, and they read A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, and so on, and you blink on the letter I, and they write it down. And then they start the alphabet again, over and over and over again. But then one of the first things that you learn after you begin to be able to communicate with people is that your condition is irreversible. Imagine yourself in this position, knowing you would never regain any bodily function. Imagine the emotional horror of this. But instead, he writes this book. It tells with both humor and deep loss the agony of missing contact with his children or laying down next to his wife. Let me finish up by reading again from the jacket cover of the book. Near the end it says, he's fed only intravenously. But he imagines preparing and tasting the full flavor of delectable dishes. Again and again, he returns to an inexhaustible reservoir of sensations, keeping in touch with himself and the life around him. But now listen to this. Jean-Dominique Bauby died 2 days after the French publication of this book. The Diving Bell and the Butterfly is a lasting testament to life. This takes my breath away every time I read and think about what he did. And that's why I say, to my knowledge and in my estimation, it's the most remarkable book ever written, not only because of the incredibly slow and painstaking mechanics of the writing itself. I mean, look, I actually spent some time to figure this out. There were 131 pages. I actually did some counting, and I counted that on average there were 200 words per page. And then I counted all of the letters on one page and found that, and this is probably typical of every page, there was an average of 5 letters per word, which means, folks, that he wrote this book by blinking 131,000 times with his left eye. I mean, that's incredible. The perseverance, but even more so, the courage and the willpower necessary to resist utter despair and choose to concentrate his heart and his mind on the importance of what he needed to say, still believing that his efforts were worth it. I mean, would not most people react, why keep going? Why not just die? I admire him so much. Now, in the previous episode, I urged you to remember that you become what you admire. If you admire excellence, you become a person of excellence. If you admire honesty, you're likely to become a person who's much more honest. If you admire kindness, you become likely a kind person. In fact, admiration plays, in my estimation, the preeminent role in character development. And of course, others historically have thought the same. But the problem that we saw last time, however, was that when people like us live in a culture surrounded by media marketing that researches and creates schemes to grab people's attention, our ability to give attention weakens, our attention span shortens. So how can you admire anything, if we find it hard to pay attention long enough for admiration to grow? Well, let me continue at that point, because in order for our culture to improve, and this is the kind of underlying argument behind all of the At the Intersection podcasts, in order for our culture to improve, people need to see admirable people, people of character. And like I ended last week, that's what you can become. But you have to admire what's admirable in order to become admirable. So it all comes down to learning how to pay attention to what's admirable. And that's hard to do. But am I blaming social media and mass media? I mean, undoubtedly, they are part of a big problem. The problem Scott Galloway, professor of marketing at NYU Stern School of Business, does. He definitely blames social media in a recent article he wrote titled Weapons of Mass Distraction. Clever. He pointed out that the average American spends 11 hours per day consuming media. That's 65% of their waking life. And roughly 40% of that time, that's about 4.4 or 5 hours spent on a mobile device. Billions of dollars and millions of person years are spent capturing and monetizing that attention. And he goes on to lay most of the blame at the feet of Meta, Google, YouTube, TikTok, Twitter, etc., the social media titans. He wrote, for example, Meta is a $500 billion business. $500 billion, that's with a TR. A $500 billion business predicated on diverting attention away from physical life to its apps. Advertising generates 98% of its $1 trillion business. And he blames them. Well, I share his frustration, but I don't blame social media. Of course, social media intentionally, powerfully, and successfully creates and feeds our screen time addiction. But does that mean if it weren't for social media, we'd all be a lot more likely to live a life of admiration? If it weren't for social media, we'd be training our minds on things that are excellent and praiseworthy. If it weren't for social media, we'd be admiring the good and the right and true people and things all over the place. Is that what would happen? I mean, I doubt it. I mean, seriously. I mean, think of it this way. You can't be distracted away from anything until you are attracted to it. But you won't be attracted to anything until you notice it, right? Everything starts with noticing. And that's where the blame lies, with us. It doesn't matter how much is going on all around us that distracts us. It's still our job to notice. And if we don't, hey, that's on us. Own it. So picture this classic scenario. A father comes home from work, he's tired, sits in the easy chair, and buries his head in the newspaper. I mean, this is metaphor. Not a lot of newspaper stuff going on these days, but buries his head in his iPad. But just think newspaper, right? And he's not even responding to his kids who desperately but vainly want his attentions. And why does he not notice them? Because he's preoccupied. And there it is. The problem is not distraction so much as it is preoccupation. And the word says it all. The dad's occupation when he comes home should be that of being a dad. But he already has a preoccupation at that moment, like what's in the newspaper. Now, if you were to ask him why he buries his head in the paper, he would probably say something like, well, I need to be informed. And yes, that's right. That's a good desire. Most preoccupations have good purposes. But when it means neglecting your own children, when it means completely missing things around you that are valuable and admirable, that's a problem that needs to be fixed, and right away. Sadly, this is almost immeasurably difficult in our culture. And this is where the weapons of mass distraction and preoccupation intersect. Social media, mass media spews out news and information, both toxic and intoxicating. You feel like you need to know things. You need to stay informed. You need to stay current, because if you don't, well, then fill in the blank. You won't be prepared. You won't be forewarned. You won't seem relevant, whatever. Human beings are naturally prone to preoccupation over matters that touch on personal safety, comfort, pleasure, inner peace, happiness, you name it. It's like gravity that pulls on our attention. But then, when you add the scheming power of media, preoccupation is unavoidable. And consider how media and marketing does it. Let me just list a few things people are kind of told to be forced to be preoccupied about these days. Perhaps number one recently are threats to good health, but it's not just COVID anymore. And there are commercials, all sorts of commercials telling you about all kinds of diseases and infections that are lurking all around you that you need to be vaccinated or medicated against. How about all of a sudden we're hearing all sorts of stuff about identity scams? You know, somebody could actually steal the title to your home without you knowing it. I mean, maybe that's happening quite a bit today, but quite a bit in a world of millions and millions of people is still not rising to the level of being preoccupied about it. How about domestic problems? You know, if you don't let leaf guard protect your gutters, your foundation might rot, or you could be climbing a ladder and fall and kill yourself. Or how about future planning now? I mean, you know, there's all these commercials about Select Quote, where you need to get life insurance because you could die at any time. And of course, all of those things are actually true. It's just the compounding effect, one after the other, on top of each other. And our whole life, it's like we are burdened with all of these things on us. Media saturates our lives with worst-case scenarios that amp up our natural tendency to be anxious about our personal welfare. And I'm only scratching the surface of the ways in which the world around us just won't let us take a break from things that seem to demand our attention and feed our anxious thoughts. And then, because we hardly ever get a break from all these things pressing in upon us, and when we finally do, when we can finally plop down in front of the TV, or we get some me time, or play fantasy football or whatever, that simply intensifies our focus on that particular activity and we don't want to be interrupted. So the big question is, how do we keep from being so preoccupied that would help us successfully live out our desired orientation toward things that matter the most? But you know, actually, the answer is not that difficult. Just think back to that classic scenario about Dad coming home and burying himself in his newspaper. And remember, this is metaphor for anything else you're burying your head in. But he does that, and he doesn't even engage with his children. Here's the question. What can break through and help him give his attention to his kids in that moment? I'll tell you what can happen. A little 4-year-old daughter comes along, and it won't be long before she runs into the room and crashes through the newspaper to jump into Daddy's lap. You know, that'll do it. But in that moment, you see, too many dads are prone to tell her, hey, run along, Daddy's busy, right? But the point is, in that moment, created by her gleeful attack, the dad at least momentarily becomes conscious of a choice. That's important because preoccupation doesn't work that way. I mean, here's a thought you're never going to think for the rest of your life. You've never thought it, you never will think it. I think I'm going to start being preoccupied right now. You know, you see, preoccupation never gives us a choice in advance. It just happens. Again, like gravity, you can't get away from it. So, what do? Well, you have to create the moment to make the choice. My wife's a great cook, great baker. When she bakes a pie or cookies or a cake, she sets a timer to signal an alert. She sets the timer on her phone, or she sets the timer on the oven so that that alert is going to go off when she needs to check on the things in the oven. Why? Because she knows when she walks away, she already knows that she might get involved in something else and completely forget about the cake in the oven. How many of us have wound up with burnt cookies for that reason, right? So she sets the alert. And we can deal with preoccupation in the same way. Create what I call attention alerts. Something which in a breakthrough moment reminds you that you've got a choice about what to give your attention to. You know, the Bible reveals numerous situations where God created these kind of moments. One of those choice moments was when God prompted Joshua to stand before the Jewish people and boldly challenge them to choose this day whom you will serve. As for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. See, moments like those often come then with visible reminders, attention alerts visually. In those days, stacked rocks set up as a testimony worked really well. Every time the people passed by, that stone obelisk compelled their attention toward the choice they had to keep making. But in this case, we're just looking for an alert, something that breaks you out of preoccupation, so you get better and better at being able to move in and out of preoccupation so that you can pause to notice particularly admirable people and admirable things, important things, things that matter. I'm going to talk to you more about how to select those admirable things in an upcoming episode. We're actually going to be staying in this realm of talking about admiration because it is the key element in character development. So I've got next week and a week after that where we'll still be talking about this. But first, I have another crosswalk for you today to help you think creatively about what kind of attention alerts might work for you. For example, here's one that works for me. That moment when I'm paying for something at the store is a time that we all tend to be preoccupied. So I've made that a location, and the act of getting out my wallet and taking out my credit card as an attention alert to stop whatever I'm thinking about at that time and notice the name badge of the clerk. You see, I want to be a person who's careful to care about other people. I forget to do that a lot of times. And so that little alert, and you could, if you want, you could even put something in your wallet when you open it. There's a little card that reminds you. And so my goal, you see, in that moment is to use their name as I thank them or tell them have a good day or something very casual like that, but to actually use their name. It's something that draws me out of preoccupation and reminds me I really want to be a kind person. Now, that's just a small thing, but so is the buzz of an oven timer going off, right? So the question is, what might work for you as an attention alert? Here's another one, kind of similar, that I've taken on, and it's really important to me. You know, we all have to call customer service occasionally, whether it's for your phone bill or insurance or some technical question that you have. And I've developed the habit. It hasn't happened, it doesn't happen all at once, but it's now become a habit that every time I call a customer service representative, and they always start by giving their name, I will write the name down at that moment, because it will be my intention at the end of that call is to thank them by name for whatever help they might have given. Again, that's what this crosswalk is about, to find what might help you to break out of preoccupation in the middle of your day, in the middle of your activities, that will help you remember to think about the things that are most important, about what's admirable to you and the kind of person that you want to be. And when you work on these attention alerts, you're going to find that you'll be able to avoid much more successfully the kind of blindness that preoccupation causes. Because ultimately, the whole ball game is doing what we talked about last week. The whole idea is whatever is true, whatever is honorable, whatever is just, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is commendable, if there's anything excellent, if there's anything worthy of praise, think about these things. Now, I told you at the beginning, I want to give away this book. This is actually, I got this all the way back in, I think, 1997. It's got a new cover, and I've got it among the recommended resources. You'll see the link at the end. But if you want to have a chance to win this book, sign up for Crosswalk episode 12. Work on your attention alerts, and just by signing up, put your name in a hat, and we'll do the drawing next week before we get rolling with the episode. And I will get those out to you, both the Bill Bennett book and the Jean-Dominique Balbi book. And I just hope you'll, this is going to be something I want to do regularly. I just want to give some things that are going to help you. I'm not interested in making a bunch of money. Obviously, this is all free stuff, but I just want to keep giving some of this stuff away. If it's a book that I believe is meaningful, hey, I want people to have it and give you a chance to get it without you having to spend anything on it yourself. Well, that's it for this week. If you appreciate what I'm trying to do in this podcast, I just request that you would share it with your friends. Subscribe to my Fresh Impact YouTube channel. Within 24 hours, I'm going to have a permanent version on YouTube of this. Take out some of the extra little pieces and just have something that lives there evergreen. The audio version is going to be available for those who want to listen on the go. If you want to tell people about, if you know somebody who likes to listen to podcasts rather than to watch online, you can tell them where to get the podcast and be listening to that. All the links that I referred to can be found at the end of this video. Hopefully you're just willing to be part of something worthwhile and you think this podcast is one of those things. Send me a comment if you would, or an email, and just tell me your thoughts, and maybe even give me an idea of something that you might want me to discuss in the future. So, hey, I really appreciate you being here with us today. I'd love to hear from you, as I said. Now, I'm looking forward to next week already. We're going to be on to part 3 of this topic on admiration, and I'm going to call it Admiration versus Egocentricity. So I hope you'll enjoy me. I hope you'll join me next week on At the Intersection with Doug Newton. And remember, let's stand up to the power of preoccupation.